Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Cool Vibes with Key. I'm your host, Kiara, aka Key, and today I am joined with,
I'm Dave Barney.
and
You can call me
today we
Dave.
are going, and today we're going to be doing our second episode of the Overachiever's Guide to the Corporate World. And today we are looking at the tech and technology field. So Dave, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. As I said, Dave Barney. I've been in IT for 33 years. Just recently retired. I've been in,
Congratulations.
yes, thank you. I've been in a variety of positions. I started as a database developer, building reports, things like that. Moved all the way up to different management, running application development, running data warehousing, reporting, analytics, moving all the way up into enterprise platforms and eventually things like telco and infrastructure. So the last 5 years before I retired, I was a CIO of two different companies.
Okay. So you definitely got up there in your time.
Yeah, it was a long time in. I learned a lot along the way, and I got to the top of the position. And once I had enough, I thought, let's just go ahead and retire. I don't want to let somebody else in, somebody younger into that position.
That's definitely fair. What kind of did you have like prior education before entering tech, or were you one of those lucky few?
I was one of the lucky few. So I'm Gen X. So I graduated college in 1990, and in 1990, most people didn't know how to do computers at all, even just individuals using them because they weren't very common. Uh, my degree is actually in criminal justice, but I always was working in computer jobs while I was in school.
Okay.
So I was doing data entry and I was doing word processing, and I even ran a small Banyan Vines network, which no one out there knows what it is. But that was before we had all these wonderful things. That was a token ring network, which was a whole lot of fun to manage. And it was the first and only network I ever directly managed. So I was able to get in without having the background in education
Okay.
because if you were smart and you learned fast, and I did, you could pick up the technical skills and move forward. The first time I actually got any training was a 1 week SQL class to when I was moving over to be a DBA. And
Ooh.
I helped teach that class because I would always finish my homework assignments right away in the class. And then the teacher was like, well, instead of being bored, why don't you, wander around and help some of the other folks? So I did. It just,
Okay.
computers made sense to me. Databases, especially because they're very logical and very rules
Fair.
oriented. And once you know them, you can you can make them follow the rules. And so that really appealed to me and it really made sense to me. So those things just came easily. Everything else took more work.
All right. Well, since your last role was CIO, what did like your day to day look like in that role?
So the unfortunate part of IT management is that your day to day slowly becomes more and more email.
Yes.
A lot of email, a lot of meetings, a lot of PowerPoint presentations. So if you're looking to get into IT management, get ready for that. You'll have to be good with PowerPoint.
Hmm.
I'm not great with PowerPoint, but I'm great at presenting. So that helped offset my bullet point sheet, which was about all I like to do. But yeah, the day of a CIO really is handling emergencies, uh, but more handling the response to emergencies. So as a CIO, or really as any leader, you want to hire smart people and then listen to them.
Yes.
A lot of folks don't do that. They hire smart people and then they tell them they're wrong. And a lot of folks in IT management do that. Unfortunately, they think they're right. And in some cases, you may be the best tech on the team. When I took over the database team for my first management role, I was the best tech on the team. I definitely ran rings around the other folks that I was working with. So I took most of the hard stuff and tried to help them learn and grow with some of the easier stuff. Then they handed me a web team, and I didn't know how to do. I couldn't even code HTML, let alone Cold Fusion, which was what it was.
Mm.
And I told myself, well, I guess I have to learn this now. And then I stopped myself and I said, no, you don't have to learn it. You have to learn how to manage people who do it. So it's good to know the tech. It's good to know uh, acronyms, basics, have an understanding of what the tech is. But if you're going to be a leader and you're going to start gobbling up new teams with different tech, you're not going to be able to keep up with it. You just can't. No one person can. So
Right.
instead, you learn enough to be able to handle the people who are there, and you find people you can trust because you
Yes.
know that they're going to tell you straight. If something's hard, if something's easy, they're going to tell you straight the best ways to handle it, and then you get to make the decisions. Now, the decisions that technical folks make are usually based upon success rates and effort and how much time we've got to get something done, especially if you're trying to recover from an outage, let's say.
Mhm.
The decisions that the manager makes, they're informed by other things like the budget.
Right.
That'd be a great solution, but we don't have anything in the budget for it. So what can we do for this much or nothing? Um, or their politics. Yeah, that's going to make this department change, and I know that I'm going to struggle with that department. So we may go forward with it, but understand we may get pushback and have to move a different direction. So
Yes.
what I always try to do is make sure my guys understood when I told them no, why.
Right.
Sometimes it's security. The developers want to do it this way, but I know from the overseeing security groups that no, PCI compliance won't allow that, and therefore
Great.
we're not
That's
going
a
to be
good
able to
one.
do it. Period. That's just an absolute no. Or HIPAA compliance, or uh, any of the other the SOX controls that are out there. So the compliance pieces have become a bigger and bigger piece of it. And especially the one I didn't get into, but we were preparing to get into, was GDPR
Mm.
over in Europe. And that
Yes.
one is definitely one of the most intense ones.
Definitely something to navigate and learn.
Yeah, absolutely. So really, your day at IT period is pushed by a lot of things that happen. You don't often get the planned day you want because either a crisis happens or a new priority jumps in. So you have to be able to be flexible. But my job was to keep those guys working on the tech
Mm.
and deal with the business and keep them off their backs. Um, Luckily, the last job we weren't physically in the same building because we were all remote. So that made it easier because I just told my guys, don't answer anything from them. Don't answer a phone call, don't answer a text, don't answer an IM or an email. I will be
Okay.
handling this while we're having this incident, and I've got control of it and communications of it. When we were physically in an office, I've had to walk over to a desk and say, guys, you need to leave them alone so they can get this solved, and I will let you know when it's done.
Right.
People just want things to work, right? And the interesting part about IT is it's not that things break, which is what people think. Oh, how do things just break? And I'm like, you guys don't realize how lucky we are that they don't break all the time.
That's a big one.
So much going on in so many moving parts in any IT environment that not having outages is a fantastic day, and not having crises or anything breaking at all is a fantastic day. And then when you throw users into the mix and the things that they can figure out how to do, whether they be simple mistakes or really bad common sense mistakes, um, it gets a lot tougher to manage everything. So your day is the good part is your day is rarely ever the same thing twice. The bad part is it's rarely ever the same thing twice. You have to scramble and jump to handle things, and you can have an entire day that you have set aside to do one thing, maybe preparing a board presentation, and you get sidetracked for 6 of those 8 hours going and handling some new crisis that's erupted.
That sounds like us every day. Every day at
Mm-hmm.
like 4 o'clock. Where did the time go? How is it the end of the day? We didn't
Yeah,
get done X, Y, and Z, but we got done F.
yeah, exactly. When I was running IT for the luxury furniture reseller that I was working for, that was based here in the Hudson area, uh, all the problems started at 4:45.
Yes.
Yeah,
Every day.
yeah, every day. It's like seriously, it's 4:45. The smarter people were the ones who came in at like 6 a.m. and left by 3 because they didn't get caught trying to go out the door.
Yep.
But most of the guys, especially my developer types, but mostly IT folks, we tend to be night owls. We don't like to get up that early, so
No.
it's only a rare few that do that.
Those are definitely the chosen few.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And it's nice to have them on the team because they can start tackling problems that just got found when a store starts to open or when people start to get to the office faster than trying to get somebody out of bed and online.
And what would you say would be the average work-life balance in the industry?
It's hard to give an average because it depends on where you're working. So if you're in a startup, there is no work-life balance. So people like to do startups because they're interesting. There's a possibility of getting equity in the company, and then when the company IPOs, you can make a bunch of money. But that usually requires working 12 to 14-hour days, some weekends, if not all weekends. It's really it's an intense piece. I've not known anybody who did a startup that then turned that into enough of a profit to justify the amount of time they put in. But I don't know a lot of people who went to startups either. By the time I was up higher in management, I didn't have contact with a lot of folks at their early stage of the career, which is who they usually get to come into those things.
Right.
I did have a few people who left to go to startups, and then when I connected with them down the road, it turned out to not be the greatest thing that they'd ever done.
Yeah, that's a commonly heard thing,
Yep.
especially in tech startups.
Yeah, and tech startups they're exciting, they're fun, they've got beer, they've got ping pong tables, but what they mostly have is a bunch of stuff to try to keep you there all day, so that you work a lot more hours than your
Hmm.
regular salary justifies. Which for the equity possibility, I mean, if you're one of the ground floor people in Facebook, you never have to work again. You could have retired about 2 years into the job,
Yeah.
so maybe that's good enough. But for that's the kid making the NBA out of high school, or the guy making the Major League Baseball out of high school.
The
There's
unicorn.
people, it happens to people, but it's a very small percentage. Most
Hmm.
people put a lot of effort in, and they just have memories and enjoyment that they got when they were there.
Yeah,
And
that's definitely common. I hear a lot of people at startups now, they're always saying, yeah, even accounting, they're always like, yeah, we work our 14-hour days like during peak, and even like during regular off hours, it's like 10. I'm like,
mhm,
that's that's a lot.
yeah, yeah, that does tend to attract the younger crowd, not just because you got more energy at that age, but because you don't have as many responsibilities. So
Right.
if you're not married, you don't have kids, you're probably not caring for elderly parents yet. So the sort of things that you have to be able to get done, um, you know, you do not like doing that when you have kids. I had kids fairly young into it, and when I had to work those hours, it's like I'm just missing time, building that relationship with my kids. So same thing goes for spouses. They don't like being the only one at home alone, whether they have kids or not. So it can be really tough. Your larger corporations manage work-life balance a whole lot better,
Hmm.
um, mostly because there's so many people. It's
Right.
difficult to pin down any one. Now, managers are going to be different from manager to manager. Uh, if you're in the office, some managers like FaceTime, and FaceTime means I see you there. So you figure out what the manager's normal schedule looks like.
Mm.
You come in just before they come in, and you leave just after they leave. I always told my guys, especially once I got divorced, I always told my guys, look, don't look at what I'm doing. I've got nothing to go home to right now other than whatever I'm cooking for dinner tonight. So if I'm here until 6 o'clock because I'm trying to get something done, I'm here until 6 o'clock. Don't look at my light and think that I can't go home because of that. You leave when your work is done. When your
Right.
work is at a good stopping place. That's what I used to tell people, because my ex-wife used to say, well, when is your work going to be done? And I said, it's never done.
It's never.
There's always a million more things to work on. I just want to get to a good stopping place. Like if I'm coding a stored procedure, I want to get that stored procedure finished and tested. And then I can go, okay, you know what? That's good enough. I've got it out of my head for today. Tomorrow morning, I can come in and start testing it again, and then promote it to production or promote it to QA or whatever the environment is going to. But if I do that in the middle of coding it, it's going to take me a half an hour to get started again in the morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So mine was usually self-inflicted, and not because I was trying to get ahead, but just because I didn't like breaking my work up like that. And that's what I found with most developers, and even other IT folks, was I just want to get this one thing done, and I'll leave as soon as I have it done. And then, that might make you go a half an hour late. It might make you go an hour and a half late. You just don't know. So, I mean, I would say your average corporate person is putting in at least 40 a week, and maybe 50.
Mm.
The 60-hour weeks usually means you guys are crunching on something. And
Yes.
if you're in IT, you should expect to have some of those every now and then. It's just part of the job. And it's kind of fun, especially if you're doing it with other people. It can be energizing and it gives you something to talk about, 3 years later. Remember when we had that sprint for whatever? And yeah, and those can be interesting and, like I said, exciting. But I always tried to make sure that whoever was handling those sorts of things had time the next time. So, for instance, hey, you know what? You're in the barrel tonight. We need somebody to get this done tonight, and you're going to be the one who gets it done. But the next one that comes up like that isn't going to you; it's going to somebody else because I
Right.
want you to get back to a nice steady state before I burn you out again. And that was how I tried to handle my projects. You can get guilty of leaning on the same person over and over again because they're just that good. But then you also give that person days off that don't count as their PTO, and you look the other way when they leave at noon on a Friday because they're getting some of their life back.
Right. It's all
So
about that balance
it is, it
somewhere,
is,
even if it's not on the front end.
yeah. And companies will tell you they're about work-life balance. They're not. Smart managers are, smart leaders
Yes.
are, but companies are never about it. They're just about the bottom line, and they're never a family. You can feel like you have a family with your team, but the companies are never a family. A family would not, well, a family might abuse somebody that much, but um, that's usually illegal. So,
All right. Moving on to some of those more industry shortfalls. So we got things like process optimization, which, in IT, that's a big one. I
mhm.
know, especially for us, we're always looking to optimize, streamline. What can we make auto, RPA? Um, so, what would you say is some of our shortfalls in tech?
So overall tech, I'd say one of the biggest shortfalls is tech debt. Um, it happens mostly in developed systems, but reporting systems and data warehouses are guilty of it. Even networks can be guilty of it. And
Mhm.
tech debt, for those who don't know, is the shortcuts you took to get something done that aren't the best way to do it. Every one of those you do is something that will eventually need to be taken care of in order to provide better efficiency, handle higher volume, uh, handle the new processes you're throwing into it. So you will pay that tech debt, and you will pay it not in the 2 hours you saved, but in 14 hours that you have to work it in order to fix what you did. So tech debt to me is the biggest one. I tried to keep 20% of my team's time for reworking tech debt in every sprint. We often lost that time because everything else was a higher priority, but that's how
Right.
you end up with it. And I always would tell my folks, when you run into that, some developer 5 years ago, and you say, "Oh, this guy was an idiot. He did it like this." He probably wasn't an idiot. He probably had a deadline he had to handle and did it because he needed to hit that deadline because somebody was screaming at him and never managed to get back to it because that's what happens. And that's how we build tech debt. And most companies and their applications have probably a minimum of a year's worth of tech debt to go correct. I think
Yes.
that's the biggest one in the tech industry. The other is just the same thing that's going on with pretty much everybody out there right now in corporate America. Too many demands, too little time, uh, too just a lack of understanding from higher ups or a lack of caring from higher ups about what it really takes to get something done,
Yep.
and understanding again, listen to the smart people who are talking to you, and then you can push them or you can trade. Hey, I know you're saying it's going to take that long to get that done, but what if we just get this part of it done? And those are the negotiations I was always having with the business around, okay, let me give you a phase one so you can have this function by that date. And then these other functions that you want will be a phase two. And we will schedule the phase two. We're not gonna do it like, yeah, we'll get to it next year. We'll schedule the phase two in, but I can't hit your date that you want with all these things you're asking for. Good
Right.
partners would nod and agree, and then we would meet that and get it taken care of for them. Bad partners would just stomp their feet and insist that they had to have it then, and that would usually mean either we delivered something shoddy, which we'd never really like doing, or we missed the date anyway because the date was never realistic.
That's when you get your tech debt. It starts piling up.
Exactly, because that's
There's
how you,
unrealistic deadlines.
when that deadline is too short for what it really should be, you say, well, I'm going to cut these pieces out because that's part of good maintenance, but I can't afford good maintenance right now. All I can afford is to get this done, and I'll
Yeah.
just do it later. And yeah,
That's most of my job right now is going back, fixing those processes that we glossed over before.
and I mean, it's good that they've got you doing that because you're actually putting a part of your capacity against tech debt, which isn't something that usually happens.
Yes.
And that, again, it goes for every department, whether it's an IP schema that's different in this one regional office than it is from all the rest of the different offices, and the network guys just don't have time to go back and redo the IP schema. Your ETL processes on your data warehouse really need enhanced, but until it actually breaks something or is so slow that you can't load a night's data in time for an 8 a.m. report to come out, you're just not going to touch it.
Nope, it's not worth it.
Yep, exactly. There's just too many other things you're being yelled at about.
All right, so we talked about some shortfalls. And obviously, there's endless potential with tech. We're seeing all different sectors of tech grow. We got like logistics, AI. So, where would you say are some of the biggest like industry potentials?
So AI is going to have a significant impact. How
Yes.
significant, I don't know. Most people who talk about AI are talking about algorithms that
Hmm.
we've been using for decades.
Yes.
I remember they said, well, you can use AI to write your code. I'm like, yeah, I had a tool for SQL Server that would do CRUD, which you may not have heard that acronym: create, read, update, delete.
Yeah.
So every time I build a table, I need those four procedures if I'm building something to it. And it would do that. You could build the table, and then you could say, give me CRUD, and it would pop it out, and then you would tweak a few little pieces of it, and you were done. And that was nice. It was something fast. There's a lot more to it these days, obviously, and I think that developers, even when you're not in the AI space, should be taking advantage of the tools for it. Because if it throws a template out there for you to build a new class or something like that, or a library, not using it is a waste of your time. You
Right.
should. But most of what we think of as AI is just that. It's the algorithms that we've had for years. The stock market's been handled by computers using algorithms for a few decades now. And in
Yeah.
fact, they had to put pieces in place so that they could stop selling if there was a runaway because a couple of computers decided this was important. And the next thing you know, all of the computers are doing it, and it's happening faster than a human could do it. And then the market says, nope, hang on, we're shutting down the market, and then they go kind of unravel what these computers are trying to do. But they've been doing this for decades. Will it get better? Absolutely. Right. The newer AI pieces that people are working on are really true machine learning and feeding data in to find new ways to think about problems. The issue is that we can still see that they can't make hands in art, and they write some of the most miserable novels you'll ever read. So it needs a lot more training. And I think
Yes.
we're going to need a lot of things in social and political space to be handled before we can really see the true potential of AI. But if I was a young person going into IT today, that would be one area that I would look at. The other one that I always recommend to people is cybersecurity. That
Yes.
one is not going to go away. Nobody is suddenly going to try to not hack into your systems. There's a lot that you can do in cybersecurity, so you're not stuck with just one position. Every company needs a CISO if they're over probably, I don't know, $30 million in size. Um, you got to have that security. And if you're
Right.
handling any kind of sensitive data. So those jobs are big ones right now. And then everything else around big data and analytics. Those are the pieces that are still. So your standard SQL job isn't as big a deal anymore, although there's so many companies with legacy systems that it'll be not your generation, but the one after that probably that will not have to deal with SQL anymore. Maybe. I mean, we
Lucky
still have COBOL
guys.
system out there. We still have COBOL systems out there.
Hmm.
Ohio unemployment system is still running on COBOL, and it needs to be revamped because the people who know how to work it are dead or dying. I mean, they're
Yeah.
they're they're in their 70s and their 80s now, and they're not working. So we don't do a good enough job as an industry watching for that.
Right.
But it's still SQL is nowhere near going away because of big data. But if I was, again, if I was a young person getting into it, if I was very analytical, I'd look at big data and analytics using a lot of the reporting tools like Tableau and things like that. If I was more of a security person, more of that detective puzzle fixing kind of thing, I would look at cybersecurity. And if I was a developer, I'd be trying to figure out how AI is going to help me become a better developer, not how it's going to suddenly take over. Because the idea that a business user will write out their requirements and AI will adjust that and spit back what they asked for is ridiculous, because we do that now and then they don't like it anyway and we have to redo the whole thing.
Right.
AI is not going to solve that problem. Meanwhile, if I know you, or I know your team, or I know the business, which is something I think most IT people miss, is knowing the business.
Yes.
If I know those things, I can start to anticipate when you say, I want this. And I can say, well, do you want this because of this, this, and this? And then they go, oh, well, then what should we do? Well, let's do it this way instead. And that'll fit to here and here. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Right now, AI can't do that sort of thing.
Right.
And to go back 1 second, that knowing the business piece, I've been in multiple industries now. I did call centers and outsourcing, outsourced sales centers, outsourced healthcare, did a number of things with telecom, handled a luxury furniture retailer, which was a brand new thing for me. And I learned a ton about retail, and I'll never walk into a store and see things the same again now that I know exactly what goes on and what has to go on.
Yes.
And then the last position I was in, we were a background check company. And I know so much more about how background checks work than I ever did before, from just being the one being investigated, I guess. So knowing the business means knowing how your users are going to act. It means knowing the things that are going to be important to look at. It means understanding the priorities of things. If you do that, you become a much better employee. You become much better, much more able to do your job. And you also will have people more attentive to what you have to say, especially in the business. And it's nice to have the folks in the business talking good about you, because that will help you make your moves up.
Yes.
Yeah. So I would say study the business, know the business, work with the folks, ask them questions when you're sitting down doing requirements, ask them questions about why that requirement makes sense. Not to tell them it doesn't, or to tell them not to do it, because you want to know what the impact is so that you can remember that for the next time. This is how returns are handled. This is how we handle it when a sale happens, and then 10 years later the wife and husband get divorced, and in the divorce agreement is something about the sofa they bought. So you spend $15,000 on a sofa, it's not something you just decide somebody else is going to get it.
No. Gotta fight over it.
Exactly. So we had to keep invoices longer than you normally would in order to have that record.
Right.
But if you didn't know that litigation might happen, you'd say, well, why the hell are we keeping that document for too long? So
that's definitely a good one. So for people just starting in the industry, what are some paths that they might take? I know, like you had said about cybersecurity, looking at big data. So what are some ways like people might get a different education path, maybe some certificates, things like that?
The good thing is most of the colleges that are out there now in the universities, they have majors for all these things.
Yes.
When I was coming up and doing my criminal justice major, there was a computer science major. That was pretty much it. Now you can do your major in cybersecurity. You can do your major. You can major in big data. You can major in analytics. So it's going to be hard to figure out what you really want to do. Like I said, I was a criminal justice major, and I spent my entire career in IT. I never used my degree from that perspective. So figuring out what you're going to do is a tough one to do when you're starting out. I would say don't be afraid to change your major, even though it puts you back a little ways. Because if you think you're going to be the guy who likes big data, and you start to do the math around it, and it just drives you crazy because you're not that much of a math person, shift gears. Go to something else that you find interesting, whether it's development, application development, mobile app development, or again, cybersecurity, networking, those sorts of things. Because if you just think you want to be in IT because you like tech, and you're good with tech, um, doesn't mean you're going to like when it's a full-time career.
Right. I feel
The other
like
thing I would say
that's
is
something.
certifications are important. So as a hiring manager, when I would look at somebody's resume, I
Yes.
liked to see college degrees
Hmm.
because a college degree tells me you can devote 4 years in the pursuit of something,
Yes.
and that it takes a certain amount of focus that not everybody appreciates. But I didn't always care what it was in. Um, these days, it's more commonly going to be in IT. If you didn't have a college degree, then I went looking for experience, and I didn't match them year for year. 4 years of experience wasn't necessarily as good as a degree, but depending upon where it was, it might be better than a degree. Um, but if you'd been 10 years doing something and you don't have a college degree, I'm still going to hire you if I think you're the right person for the job. But certs become a lot better then because certs are something you don't have to have. You don't have to go to college to pursue those certs. You can take individual classes. You can do a lot of it for free and just take the tests. So I would say if you're not sure, if you get to the point where you're not sure, you're somebody who can't afford college, but you want to get started in IT, maybe so you can earn enough money that you can go to college. Getting certs is the best way to go about it because it shows you that you have expertise in an area. Um, it shows that you're not going to walk in and when they start talking acronyms at you, you're going to just sort of shake your head. Uh, so those would be I would prize those over a degree for a very specific position. It does tend to pigeonhole you though.
Right.
So and
And
management, going into management, if you really want to move up into management, which I don't recommend for everybody because not everybody's built to lead people. It can be
no.
very frustrating. It can be very maddening. My biggest problem wasn't my people ever. They were always the best part of my job. It was my peers in the business that were always my biggest struggle. And when I got to the C level, it was a very big struggle on a regular basis because those weren't people that I enjoyed spending my time with. Um, so I probably would have been better off staying at the director level, but I wanted more and more control so I
Hmm.
could make the environment better for my team
Right.
and so I could make more money. I wasn't in it
Of
for free.
course.
Uh, and I wouldn't have been able to retire as early as I have, but I might
Right.
have been a lot happier. So,
Trade-offs.
yeah, trade offs. Always about trade offs.
And do you have any tips for anyone like just starting out? Like, should they go through recruiters? I know like hackathons are definitely always a growing way for companies to pull talent.
Yeah, if companies are doing hackathons, that's a great place to go in. That's usually going to be your larger companies. But if you can get yourself into one of those and you can do a good job with it, then you're gonna be noticed right away. Um, recruiters, I worked with a lot of recruiters over the years. The biggest problem we usually have in IT hiring is that our HR departments aren't tech savvy, so they just don't know.
It's
I had
Kronos.
the very first place I went to had a tech recruiter, and she was really good, and then she left,
Oh no.
and I was looking for DBAs, and I would get resumes where they spelled it SEQUEL, and I
Interesting.
said, that's usually the first sign that somebody doesn't know what they're talking about. So it wasn't their fault; they were in HR. But I had eventually got to the point where I was like, just send me all the resumes you get. Don't filter them at all because I don't want you to push one out of there that's a good resume because you don't understand it well enough. Recruiters
Right.
take that out of the equation. So a recruiter is going to uh, get you good people.
Hmm.
Everybody they send over, if you work with them to teach them the qualifications for the position, a recruiter is going to send you over good people every time. You just have to decide which ones you want and if you can afford them, manage them. I didn't do a lot of it. I did a lot of it in contract to hire, I should say. I didn't do a lot of overall just contractors. It was always contract to hire, and I did some straight recruitment. Usually, again, I would let the HR department have it for 30 days. And
Hmm.
after 30 days, if they hadn't gotten me anything, if they'd gotten me a few candidates worth looking at, I would let them keep it for a while. If they hadn't gotten me anything worth looking at and everything they sent through, I was just like, nope, nope, nope. Then I would go to the recruiters and say, okay, because a recruiter is expensive. It's going to be, uh, the company's going to pay 20 to 23% of your first year salary. and some of them have guarantees like a 90-day if the person leaves within 90 days, or if you fire them within 90 days because they weren't really competent, because it can be tough to interview sometimes, tech skills. Uh, then you get your 20% back or whatever it was. Some of them it can go as long as 6 months. If they do something horrible, then you can maybe stretch that out to a year. But as a candidate, the good thing about a recruiter is they're going to understand your skill set because they're going to be more technical. They're going to shop you around. They're going to if they really like you and they think you're really good, they're going to send you to people who didn't even ask for you. Now, I didn't always like that, but some people do. And some people look at that and go, oh, I can probably find a position for this person. Um, my stuff was always a little more planned, so I never really liked getting them out of the blue. But I did work a lot with the recruiters and built relationships with them, and they brought me lots and lots of people who were very qualified, and I hired a lot of them, and some of them I'm still friends with today because they were just that good an employee, and some of them I brought up to leadership positions after being contractors with me. So yeah, I'd say if you have a contractor, just sending it to contractors isn't always the greatest thing.
Right.
Um, if they're talking to you and asking you for it, just make sure you know who they are. If they've got no web presence and no real, you can't really find much information about the company, I would run away. I wouldn't go with them. But if it's a large firm, or just somebody who at least has some web presence, and maybe somebody in the industry has heard of before, like a Tech Systems, a Matrix, one of those sorts of GTN. Those are all big nationwide recruiters. Um, then yeah, you're going into a database. They're going to put your stuff into a database, and when somebody goes looking for who they can have to have that job, they're going to pull out a bunch of you, and then they're going to sort through you and look for that. If you're there with them long enough, if you do 2 or 3 placements with them, or if you do contract jobs with them, they'll start to look for stuff for you, as opposed to just looking. Or when they hear one, they'll go, "I got the perfect guy for that," and they won't even go to their boxes. So that's the benefit you get of working with a recruiter. I just wouldn't send them to like any more than 3 or 4 recruiters, unless they're regional. So if you have a regional recruiter, it's okay to send it to one for the Northeast, one for the Southwest, and that kind of thing. If they're all nationwide, don't go with more than 3, because I've gotten the same person from multiple different recruiters, and the recruiters aren't very happy with that.
I
Yeah,
can't
I always was
imagine.
like, whoever got them to me first, that's who I'm going with. So if you were the one who got me the person first, then if I want to hire them, I'll hire them from you. And I would tell the recruiters, I already got this person from X recruiter, and they'd go, oh, okay, they didn't tell me. Now, once in a while, the recruiter won't tell you they've submitted you for a position.
Mm,
Usually, they will tell you that, or they'll either ask you if you want to be submitted, or they will tell you you have been submitted, which is nice because then at least that, and and if they can, they'll tell you the company. Hey, I submitted you for a position over at Target. Cool. So when another recruiter says, "Do you want to go for this position at Target?" Well, is it this position? Because I had another recruiter talk to me about it already. Don't make them waste their time.
right. Just
Then they'll
common
like you.
sense.
They'll like you more, and they'll potentially submit you for more places.
And anything maybe to watch out for just starting. So, like any major red flags that you might see at the beginning.
Well, the first ones are the things you might hear. We talked about them already a little bit. The company is a family.
Family.
It's not. It never is. Um, but again, your team can be. Your team
Right.
can be that close. I've had teams that spent most of their off hours hanging out together because they were just that close. And
Mm.
it was the only people they could talk about work with, because that's another thing you have with IT people. When you start trying to talk to your family about work or some of your friends, uh,
What is
you,
it?
yeah,
What's
I
going
would always
on?
try to genericize it a little bit, because it
Hmm.
wasn't usually the work I was talking about. It was the people around the work. So I would
Yes.
genericize what the work was and talk more about the people. And that's how I was finally able to have vent some days to my ex-wife, who had no technical knowledge at all.
Right.
But yeah, the company's not a family. When they tell you things like it's a fast-paced environment, I've not had one place tell me they weren't a fast-paced environment. I was at one that was breakneck speed. I was at one that was kind of brutal, and then the last 2 I was at were not fast at all. In fact, they were very, very slow. So just because you hear that, don't run away from it. It may not be true. If they tell you you're going to need to work 60 hours a week on average in order to be there, you have to think about what your work-life balance is going to be. Do you want
Right.
that? Because maybe you're 22 and hey, you know what? I got nothing else going on right now. So if I spend 12 hours a day working and I get paid a decent amount and I'm getting all this experience in a bunch of different things, cool. I'll do that for a year. I'll do that for 2 years. Uh,
Right.
so it really is your decision. Just be mindful of it and know that that's what you're walking into.
Right.
What else can I think of that a corporation might pull to watch out for? So, uh, if you have a corporation that you're working for that's going to have software installed on your computer to watch out for, to track your activity time, I'd avoid those
Yeah.
because it should. The way I always worked with my folks that were offsite was it's about productivity. If you get your stuff done, I don't care if it took you 6 hours or 8 hours. Now I couldn't say that to the CEO, but that was the reality of the situation. But if you weren't looking for new stuff to fill those 2 hours, you weren't going to be at the top of my list for the next raise or promotion.
Right.
So, if you were somebody who's like, hey, give me more, cool. Sometimes I didn't have time to give them more because I didn't have time myself to figure out what I could hand them. Um, but if you're at one of those companies, again, it depends on your ambition. If you're looking for a place to hide, corporate America is filled with people who are hiding. They have their little niche job, and they're going to stay at that little niche job for the next 30 years and retire. And used to be you could actually get that done and have a pension and do all the rest of that. Now they're probably going to lay you off at some point. If you're the person, this is probably a really good point for somebody starting out. You find people in IT who are the only one who knows how to do this specific thing.
Yes.
Whether it's work on this application, work on the data warehouse, handle this part of the network, whatever it happens to be. It's not hard to tell after a while when you want them to train up some other people so that when they go on vacation, things don't fall apart, that kind of stuff. When they push back on those sorts of things, you can kind of start to figure out that what this person is trying to do is make themselves invaluable by having nobody else able to do this thing.
Right.
If nobody can work on this, then it's mine, and they will never get rid of me. Mm-hmm. And number one, the day that goes away, I don't need you anymore.
Right.
Number two, as a leader, you just put a target on your back. I don't want people like that. No. If you want to make it, don't make yourself invaluable by being the only person who knows how to do this. Make yourself invaluable by being able to do anything I throw at you. Handle it, automate it, hand it off to the juniors on the team and say, what's next, boss? That's the best way to make yourself invaluable to the company, because I don't care if we drop the area that you're working on. I'm going to try to find someplace I can get you in, because right. I know anything I throw at you, you will handle or try to handle. So that would be one of the big things I would say, is try to make yourself invaluable by being somebody who can just get things done.
All right. And do you have any other tips for people just starting out?
IT is a rough job. There's a lot more emotion in it than you think. There's a lot more of yourself that you put into your work. It's ones and zeros, it's bits and bytes, whatever it happens to be. It's just code. It's not just code. It's things become your baby. They become something that you're very proud of. They become something that you work with. So understand that emotion, even though you don't think of it as being a part of IT, it's a huge part of it. When people's systems go down, they get very emotional. When somebody loses a document, they get very emotional. When somebody suddenly realizes they have to do a lot of extra work, they get very emotional. So understand that there's a lot of stress. And if you are in the position, if you want to go into IT because you want people to pat you on the back and tell you how great you are, you're in the wrong position. IT is like a car. When my car gets me to work in the morning, I don't pat it on the head and say, good car. But when it breaks down, I beat it and I scream at it. It's kind of what it is in IT. When things break down, people get very upset. But there are so many things you do all day to keep things going that nobody else knows about except maybe your team. Don't expect everybody to think you're a hero. If you have good leadership, they will pat you on the back, and that's about all you're going to get. Maybe your peers. Because the one thing, IT folks are very competitive with each other. but they recognize when somebody else does good, and they will be the ones who come up and go, dude, how did you solve that problem? That's fantastic. Show me what you did. So that's where you're going to get your praise. It's going to be in the group internally and in yourself. It's not going to be in anything from the rest of the company.
Right. Especially since no one knows what we're talking about anyways.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why when they would say, oh, you're a rock star, it doesn't mean anything, especially when it comes from a salesperson. Because tomorrow you're the worst thing ever because you didn't solve this problem.
Yes. Well, those are all the questions I had in store for you today. I want to thank you for joining me, though.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a pleasure to be on. I really want the folks coming into corporate America to understand what they're looking at and what they're going to experience. And you doing this as a podcast series is fantastic.
There's just so many different industries. I didn't even know about most of them until I started working. I'm
Yeah.
like, what's this over here?
Yeah, we don't do unless you have a parent who trains you in that and helps you understand all of it. It's really difficult to get and grasp the whole of what it is. Maybe if you get a business degree, you understand a little bit more. I don't know. Never got a business degree, so but yeah, it's the scope is vast.
Yes, it is. Well, that's all we have in store for y'all today. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.